What's up, everybody? I'm Drew Mazurek, and welcome back to another UAD Spotlight. In this video, I'm going to cover getting big rock drum sounds. Now, there's a lot that goes into getting good drum sounds. We're talking the drummer, the drums, the heads, the tuning, the mics, etc., etc. And of course, it really helps when you're in a big, great sounding room. But that's not always practical. Some of us are recording in smaller spaces, and that's going to be the focus of this video, taking drums recorded in a smaller space and making them big and huge for your rock mix. We got a bunch to cover, so let's get started. So let me start off by telling you a little bit about the session that I've chosen for this video. It's something I recorded about 10 years ago, and I chose it for two reasons. Number one, it is a slow song. And number two, it was recorded in a medium space with not a lot of reverb or ambience. And slower songs that are tracked in a dry space, they present some challenges, but also some opportunities. When you have a slow song, there's just more space between the notes, and sometimes it's really cool to fill that out. And I wanted to cover that in this video. So before we get started, let me play you the finished product so that you can see where I landed. So I'm really digging how everything has gelled together. It's focused, it's tight, it's big, it's fat, and everything has its own distinct place in the mix. The drums are plodding along with their groove. We've got a growly bass, and we've got some double-tracked guitars. I'm gonna actually cover the processing for the guitars in a future video, so be on the lookout for that. But for now, let's dig in and start looking at that drum processing. Okay, so the first thing I want to draw your attention to is that I'm doing a combination of channel-based processing here, and then I'm also using some buses. I have all of my drum tracks routed to a dedicated drum subgroup master, and I'm using a parallel or crush bus coming off of that. We'll come back to the buses later, but let's talk about the channel processing first. And it brings me to the first topic I want to cover in this video, and that is the use of slow attack, fast release compression. The idea here is that by slowing down the attack, you let the transient sneak through. And then we have the compression phase where gain reduction is applied. But because the release is set fast, the compressor lets go quickly, and we get punch and movement that our ears really like. And when you hear engineers talk about compressors adding punch, this is what we're talking about: slow attack, fast release. So I have the SSL E channel strip on the kick drum here and on the snare drum. And then I have the Neve 2254 on the drum subgroup. And with the SSLs, they default to slow or auto attack or program dependent attack. What you want to make sure is that you just don't have the fast attack light lit. And so I've got that here on the kick. I've got it here on the snare. And with the Neve 2254, you come here to the compress area and you want to make sure that it's set to slow and not to fast. And then I do want to draw your attention to something here. It's a little bit different, a little bit out of the ordinary for me. Normally I EQ then compress, but in this particular instance, I have the EQ after the compressor. I want the compressor first to add the punch that I want, and then I want to add in this subby 30 hertz. I'm trying to build up the subsonics of this kick. And if I would have put this first, it would have triggered extra compression, and I didn't want to do that. So let's go ahead and give a listen to what just these three compressors are bringing to the table. I'm going to play you with, without for just these three compressors. Let's check it out. So that's a pretty big change, especially on the kick and the drums in general. You might have noticed not quite as big a transformation on the snare drum. And let me elaborate on that a little bit. And if we take a look at the snare drum processing here, when I recorded this, I got a lot of hi-hat bleed, and therefore I am gating this pretty hard. And if you're trying to get big drum sounds, when you're having to gate and shorten the decay of those sounds, not a great combination. So I'm going to use this as a segue to talk a little bit about some other processing and lead me to my next tip. So first of all, you'll notice that after it, I put the transient designer, and I've got the sustain cranked up in an attempt to elongate the decay post noise gate. And it's helping a fair bit, but we need a little bit more help. And that leads me to my next trick, tip, and topic for this video. And it is the use of ambience samples. Now, this is a trick engineers been using for a long, long time. My favorite mixer, Andy Wallace, it does it a lot. I copied everything off of him. Why not copy this off of him as well? And you'll notice that I have trigger here. I have Steven Slate trigger here, an amazing drum trigger program. And I've got the close mics muted. I'm not trying to replace my snare. I like my snare, but I need to help it out a little bit. And you will notice I also have a distressor after it doing slow attack, fast release compression to sort of, make this ambience sample a bit more aggressive. So let's start off by listening to just the snare drum, and you can hear what we're starting with and what we're trying to help out. Let's check that out. So that's the snare I recorded. It's got a lot of snap. There's lots of things I like about it, but because I had to gate it hard, it is a little bit short. So let's bring in the ambience sample and hear what it's bringing to the table. So we've added bigness, explosiveness, and width because those samples are stereo, and that is super cool. Okay, so next up, let's talk about saturation. And if we look at my overhead signal chain, you'll notice that I'm starting with the UA 610A. You've seen me use this before. I love this plugin. It makes basically everything sound good. And I'm not doing a lot with it. I'm literally 1 or 2 clicks above the factory default. That's just a hint of saturation and coloration that is awesome. And you will notice that I am using its low frequency EQ to dump out some bottom end. These are overheads. I'm not looking for them to contribute meaningfully to the low end. And then after that, I have a classic Pultec EQ, the MEQ5. It is the mid-range EQ. It makes big, beautiful, broad strokes of EQ. I'm seeing so many people these days killing their tracks with these 14 bands of narrow Q, filters, and it's not the way I like to go. This thing is going to sound great. My overheads have a little bit more snare in them than I'd like, so this is going to pull them back along with that saturation. And then after that, I got something you might be surprised by, and that is the Culture Vulture. This is an amazing sounding plugin. Most people think of it as a distortion box, and it does that in an amazing way. But for me, I use it in all sorts of things, drum overheads. It's going to smooth things out both dynamically and frequency-wise, and it just adds sort of a solidity to anything. You can even try it on a whole mix. It's pretty great sounding. So let's solo up the overheads, and let's hear that chain on and then off and then on and then off. So you can hear without the processing, those overheads are sounding kind of honky. The snare is spiking and poking through. But when you put that signal chain on it, everything just sort of glues together. The snare drum gets pushed to the back, and it's really filling out and smoothing out these overheads, and I am loving it. So now that we've walked through some of the channel-based processing, let's move on to picking the right reverb. And for me, in this particular case, the right reverb is the EMT 250. This is an early digital reverb that I've actually spent a fair bit of time with at Pi Studios in Glen Cove, Long Island. Shout out to Perry Margoloff. He's got a great studio there. And this is a really cool piece of hardware. And the plugin sounds amazing. And I've got it set pretty simply here. I'm using a 1 second decay time. And if you look, I'm feeding it from the original snare mic, right? Not the ambient snare mic, because it's got reverb kind of built in. So I'm feeding it from the original snare mic. The toms get a little bit, and then I'm actually feeding quite a lot from the overhead. This is a great tip for making drums big, because overheads are really kind of a picture of the whole kit, right? And we just spent a good bit of time making them sound good. Let's send that into a reverb to really fill out the sound. So I've got a pro tip for you here as well, and that is to add a compressor in front of the reverb on the effects return. This compresses the signal before the reverberation, and it can make your reverbs more interesting and more explosive. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna mute the reverb entirely, and let's turn off the compressor. So we're gonna hear our drums without the reverb, and then I'm gonna add the reverb alone, and then I'll add the compressor. Let's check that out. So the dry drums sounded like they were missing something for sure. And when I brought in the reverb, it got better, but adding that compressor really made that reverb fuller and more interesting and brought me into the mix and brought me into that drum room more for sure. Okay, so next up is my drum bus processing. Let me walk you through it here. It starts off with the Neve summing in its default state, just gonna add a little bit of goodness there, a little bit of Neve console coloration. And then the first in the chain is the Dangerous Bax EQ, super clean. And in fact, all I'm doing here is I'm doing a high pass filter at 36 Hertz. Just wanna kind of clean up the subsonics. And the reason for that is because what comes next is the Pultec EQP1A. This is a classic passive EQ with a tube makeup gain stage. So it's doing EQ coloration, a little bit of saturation. It's a beautiful thing all the way around. If you're not familiar with Pultecs, let me give you a quick little crash course on a Pultec. Let's start over here with the low frequency. We have 3 controls here: low frequency, CPS, cycles per second. So there's your frequency selection. And then we have a boost and attenuate. These 3 knobs go together. And then to the right, we have 3 more controls: high frequency or kilocycles per second, boost, and bandwidth. These 3 go together. I'm not actually using them in this case. And then finally, we have the 2 controls on the right. They are attenuate, select, and attenuate. So this is a cut only filter. And in this case, I'm using it to shave off some of the really sizzly top end that maybe I don't want or need in this drum mix. So let me circle back to this low frequency area here, because this is something that some of you might know as the Pultec trick. If you're not familiar with it, I'm gonna explain it to you right now. And the basic premise is that we have a frequency and an attenuate and a boost. Sounds like it shouldn't work, boosting and cutting the same frequency at the same time. It does work and it sounds great. And the basic premise is that the attenuate filter, the cut, winds up being a bit above the frequency, and the boost winds up happening mostly below. So you get what is effectively a mid or low mid sort of cut, and then a big blossoming bottom end on top of it. And it is a super cool thing. Be sure to try that on your drums. So that's the Pultec trick. Be sure to try that if you've not experimented with it. Now, after that, I have the Neve 2254 that I mentioned earlier. It's doing slow attack, fast release. And here's another pro tip for you. Lots of people don't know this, but the original hardware only had 400 milliseconds as the fastest release time that it could do. This kind of made it limited for more modern productions. So what we did was we added this control right here. It says pull divided by 8. And what it is doing is it's taking these release times and dividing them by 8. So this takes that 400 milliseconds release time and turns it into 50 milliseconds, much faster and much cooler for modern productions. I love that about this plugin, and I wanted to make sure I showed it to you. And then last in the chain is the precision limiter, which is not really doing anything except catching some peaks. So let's go ahead and do an A/B of what this drum bus chain is doing for us. Let's check it out. So that's the subtle polish that I'm looking for on my drum subgroup master. Now, let's talk about the last piece of the puzzle, which for me, parallel compression here. I mentioned it earlier in the video, and let's walk through it in a little bit more detail. We have Neve summing on that bus, but really the heavy lifting is happening here with the 1176. I like the Rev A here. It's the nastiest one. It's the grittiest one. I like what it does in this particular application. And I mentioned earlier that I'm using it coming off of the drum subgroup. Normally, I wouldn't do this. Normally, I would put it onto individual tracks so that I can have greater control over exactly how much each track is sending to the bus. But hey, in this mix, I kind of mocked it up quickly on the drum subgroup, and it was working for me. So I went with it and I left it on the drum subgroup. It just goes to show that what you do every time isn't always the right approach, right? So don't be afraid to experiment. And the reality is we have been hearing this the entire video. So what I want to do now is I want to do a playback where I turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, and so that we can hear what it's been adding this entire time. So that's really contributing a lot to this drum sound. It's taking everything that we've done in this video and is just blowing it up and bringing it to the forefront, and it's sounding really good. Let's go ahead and bring the bass back in and bring the guitars back in and do one last final listen to the finished product so that we can appreciate all of our work. So as we've learned in this video, each piece of the puzzle plays its role in taking our dry drums and making them big and fat and perfect for this rock mix. Hopefully I've given you some things to try in your next rock mix, and be sure to let me know in the comments, which one did you like, which one was your favorite, and of course, be sure to like and subscribe and hit that bell button so that you're notified of all new UA content, and I will see you in the next Spotlight.